Welcome to night 11 of Healing the Brokenhearted. And this is going to be our final night meeting together with curriculum. We've decided that next week, because we have done so well reviewing, we are just going to do a solo video of me recapping and following up on a few points. So I'm excited to get into our topic tonight, which is forgiveness. Would one of you like to start us in prayer before we begin?
I will.
Okay, thanks, Jan.
Gracious Father, we thank you for all these opportunities to be together, even when we are not physically in the same room. We ask that you bless our time, that you open our minds and hearts to hear your message that is so important to us tonight. And we ask that we take this forward and apply it to our lives each day as we proceed. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so here we are on week 11. Tonight, we are learning about forgiveness. And it has been really neat having Ray's leadership. Just a little refresher, he has, in all of these lessons, they have been dedicated at the bottom here on each page to different people who kind of inspired this chapter or maybe had a lot of growth from what was learned in the chapter. So this curriculum was made with love and was also made with people who have been walking through grief like we have. So I just wanted to remind us of that as we start this, that others are learning and needing these lessons that we've been doing. So giving and receiving forgiveness. So I guess we'll start with a startup question. Do either of you feel trapped by bitter feelings towards anyone with your loss?
Not at this time.
Was there a point?
Yeah, there were a few times when I said to my husband up there, why aren't you here?
Yeah.
I was trapped with forgiveness when I was younger.
Yeah.
It was with my father.
Mm-hmm.
Died very young. He died at 47. So I was 27 when he died. And I was very angry and because of some of the choices he made in his life and those kinds.
So both of you, it sounds like your anger was towards the person. How did that anger help you?
I think for me, it kind of had been, those were waves that came, and it was, when that would happen, it would kind of almost force me back to reality that I would need to do what I needed to do to move forward because I'm in, He's not in the picture physically. I mean, I carry memories, and much of the work he did to set things up before he passed did serve as a bridge. But when I would have one of those really kind of periods where I would be upset about him not being around, it refocused me back to saying, okay, you're it.
So it focused you back to reality. So this this raw emotion really helped ground you, it sounds like.
Yes.
Interesting. Martha, did you have something to share?
Yes, the anger emotion caused me to go to lots of forgiveness workshops. And also to, I was an older student going back after I'd been married and had a child. So I was a student during the process that he was dying. So I ended up taking lots of courses in psychology, and I ultimately became licensed mental health counselor. Through a process, and it took several years for me to actually feel like I could forgive him.
So your anger spurred you into forgiveness.
Right.
And to learning more about it. Wow. Well, I am so honored and grateful to be with you both, because you have, it sounds like, really worked through this in your own lives. And so I'm eager to learn more from you. So forgiveness is, I love this definition, a decision that I make to obey God and to walk in a higher realm. I will not allow someone else's actions or attitudes to dictate my own actions or attitudes. When it comes to forgiveness, one cannot afford to score anything less than an A. I love that. I will not allow someone else's actions or attitudes to dictate my own actions or attitudes. What a good, I guess, picture for forgiveness. I know, Martha, in therapy, we talk a lot about this. And last week, you were talking about how your behavior changes when you're angry. Something that you, right? I think you were saying something you do
yes,
is it spurs you into changing behavior. And so that kind of comes to mind when thinking about this. You know, we can't change anyone else's behavior, but we can change our behavior, our actions and attitudes. And so forgiveness is something that we can do despite what has been done.
Yes.
So the absolutes of forgiveness, we know that God tells us that we should forgive. And we also know it's essential to our spiritual, physical, and emotional health. Do you have anything to add about this? I love how it's essential, because bitterness in our heart, it piles up, just like our anger can pile up and lead to some poor choices. Bitterness can do the same, especially when bitterness is paired with anger. So being able to forgive is this action that we can do that gives us a posture to be in a physical and a spiritual and emotional place where we can continue living our life in a healthy way.
Those statements are so powerful. It's really hard for me to think of anything to add.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything. So what about unforgiveness? So not forgiving, this affects different areas of our life, right? It adds to our feelings of loneliness and isolation. It allows anger to fester. It causes physical and emotional distress. It imprisons you to the past, and it yields control of your life to those who have hurt you. Oh my goodness.
It's true.
Yeah.
It contributes to all kinds of physical ailments. As you know, as a nurse, we see people who probably have made other life choices that may or may not have impacted a certain situation, but certainly anger and its effect on cardiovascular function, digestive function. You go through the whole litany, and so yeah, it has some long-reaching effects.
Yes, that is so true.
I remember asking one of my, when I was a practicing therapist, I remember asking one of my clients why she held on to her anger. And she said it gave her energy. I know that's odd to say, but maybe that was energy to, I don't think I could think of was that if she didn't have her anger, she felt like she would go into depression.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and we talked last week about the difference between righteous and unrighteous.
Right.
And so I can imagine she had some moments of righteous anger, especially when there are unjust things that happened in her life, right? Like the girls that I have been speaking with who have experienced human trafficking, like, oh my gosh, and just abuse, like we talked about last week too. Those are the anger against those acts is righteous anger. We are angry about those. Even just thinking about, I don't even have to tell you a story, but we're all angry right now thinking about that happening to someone. And the forgiving the people who commit those crimes, commit hurt feelings to someone else, that's hard to deal with. Mm-hmm. And staying angry is a whole lot easier. When I was in grad school, my second year, So this was the year that you do clinical work. You have more time in your internship, more hours that you're doing each week doing the actual clinical care. And it was like 2.5 days out of the week, and then you would go to class 2 days of the week. And then any special events and stuff that we did, we had also. And I was interviewing at the Office for Women of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Services. That was the whole title, in Fairfax County, in the government center in Fairfax County. It's a big building. It was like so official. I was so excited to be there. And they decided that I would work with the offenders of domestic violence.
Wow.
So my whole last year of grad school, which the whole reason I went to grad school was because of my passion to eradicate human trafficking and work with victims. And here I am working with offenders of domestic violence. And I had a lot of heart healing that happened that week or that year. And some of that was, it was just so powerful. And forgiveness, I learned, is more so necessary for yourself than it is for the other person. And I think that's something that we think about, like, well, that if I forgive them, then that just kind of means it's okay what they did. But it's not condoning anything. It's saying I'm going to act differently. It's saying I'm going to choose from this day forward to not let what happened affect me in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And that's really powerful, to forgive. And when we're talking about abuse, I think the whole phrase forgive and forget is not the best phrase to use, because we need to remember that we don't need to forget the abuse that happened so that we continue to stay safe. But this whole idea that we are equipped to forgive. God has equipped you to forgive. There's a reason we feel better. And we're able to move on, because if we stay in our bitterness, we can't. If you stay in your bitterness throughout your day, you have such a bad day, right? I know I do. It's like even little things like picking up your phone, you might fumble it. Like physically, our bodies are just charged emotionally when we stay in our bitterness. Do you guys have anything to add about that?
It reminds me of some of the other discussions that we've had, changing our perspective. And Martha, you've used that a couple of times, I think, that when you shift and you see the situation from a different angle or a different perspective, sometimes you're able to deal with it in a more positive way.
That's right. My coping mechanism for most things is reframing, is doing a different shift from a different perspective. But wow, I admire you for dealing with abusers, Jessica. That is very, very difficult. I chose not to, and I knew my limitations.
Yeah, definitely.
In that area,
And so when we have this, like you're saying, this perspective change, I think after reflecting on this curriculum, like the perspective change that helps spur forgiveness is realizing how impactful it would be for yourself. So your bitterness towards someone is not going to change that person, right? We can, of all the things in the world we can control, which is not very much, we can't control many things, but we can control ourselves. And we can't control, we can get into the logistics of not technically being able to control being sick. But so there are things that happen to our physical bodies, to our lives, like abuse or a death, like that we can't control, that happen to us, that we have to deal with. And with that, we can decide whether we're going to stay in bitterness and in anger, or whether we are going to instead take on this forgiveness as a behavior and work with a perspective change to really ultimately do it for ourselves. It's not for anyone else. It doesn't really, it can benefit other people, but the purpose of forgiveness, I think, is really a selfish one, which is great. That's okay. Okay, the objectives of forgiveness. Forgiveness, here we go. Forgiveness is not synonymous with forgetting, right?
Yeah.
Forgiveness is not releasing a person from legal or civil responsibilities. We are still held responsible despite forgiving or not. Forgiveness, is a lifestyle. It is taking the debt that someone owes you and delivering it to the throne of grace provided by the way of the cross. Wow, that's a beautiful statement. And then it permits you to proceed in your healing process. That's so important, and that's what we want for everyone we come across, right?
Yep.
Forgiveness is a lifestyle. That is so true.
Mm-hmm. I love the first one, though, because so many people I feel like you mentioned earlier, that if they don't want to go even attempt forgiveness because that means forgetting. And when someone's been hurt, terribly, that's difficult. And I'm so glad that that's up there. And they feel like because of being a Christian, that they have to forgive. And sometimes I know that sounds hard to say, but sometimes that can push people not to attend church or not to embrace that, because they feel like because they feel a hardening of their heart, that they can't really, they don't belong at church. People tell me that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe they have heard some wrong things, like they have to forget what people have done to them, or I'm just thinking of the girls I'm seeing a little more of these days, from Into the Jordan, and forgiveness is really hard for them because they didn't do anything to deserve what happened to them.
That's right.
And, what about in the context of grief? What does this forgiving in the death of your loved ones afterwards that you both experienced, you were talking about? Martha, you said you had gone to a lot of trainings on forgiveness, or
I did.
Right.
A lot of different ends, and some through some of the workshops were Christian workshops on forgiveness. That helped get me motivated to continue, but I was so angry. The way my father behaved, and because of him, my mother ended up marrying my stepfather, which was disastrous. And I left home the day after I graduated from high school. That's when So that was like, my father wasn't there. So that was, I was angry about that.
Yeah.
Mine were more episodic. It wasn't based on a long-term hurt. It was just going through that initial process of dealing with my partner not being there, who I relied on for certain aspects of life, and not having that individual there to even ask questions of. And it was just like, so it's a little different than I think what Martha went through, but it probably resolved a little easier because of the fact that overall our relationship had been very positive, and it was just a situational issue of him going elsewhere and not being there when I felt like I needed him.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a big difference. And forgiveness looks different with each of those types of relationships, right? And the types of hurt like you're talking about. So forgiveness lets you off the other person's hook. What does that mean? What do you think?
They no longer can, your anger and at them. They still angry at them. They're still in control of you. And that's the way I feel. And by being forgiving and getting rid of as much anger as you can, sometimes it's difficult to get rid of all of it at once. You just go, okay, I'm free. That person and their negative impact and the episodes do not have an impact. And I choose not to allow that to have an impact in my life in the future.
The one that really struck me, and it was the fifth one up there, about taking the debt that someone owes you and delivering it to the throne of grace. And there's an image there that somehow we see in other parts of our lives when we feel unable, when we feel weak, when we feel put upon. And it's, I guess, because the meditation series I'm reading is kind of reinforcing that when we are in those situations where we can't seem to let go, or we can't seem to deal with the situation, the answer is that we aren't able to, because it sometimes is beyond what is humanly possible. And the only way to really resolve it is to give it to a higher power. And I like that imagery. And I'm wondering if there aren't, you know, I think about people who go through divorce and different kinds of situations. And sometimes there's actually a physical kind of acknowledgement of letting go, whether that's burning something or casting a ball in the sea, or, you know, there's an element of just when you get to that point when you're ready to just somehow make that a reality of an experience, to do something physical.
Yeah, Martha.
I ended up writing a letter after, obviously, the death, and then burning the letter. That made me feel like there's a release.
Yeah, that's powerful. I love that, letter writing. And that's a way for you to tangibly, because you're talking about forgiveness with someone who wasn't here. You couldn't talk with them.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think you have to talk with someone in order to give them forgiveness?
No, but it was a good coping mechanism for me.
Yeah, definitely.
I could do that. I mean, I went through, like I said, the forgiveness took years, so it wasn't a thing. So I thought about different things that I could do, and symbolic for me, and then letting it become ashes and no longer having any control over my life. So am I answering the question?
Yeah, no, and I think like Jan was saying, that thinking of people going through a divorce, you know, you can still, writing a letter and burning it, that's still a powerful thing to do. And you can show your forgiveness to someone by not being bitter towards them and by working on your healing. I don't think you necessarily have to say, I forgive you, to their face in order for you to have forgiveness towards them.
It's true.
So even if they haven't died, they're still here on earth. You know, there's still that ability to work towards that forgiveness. Yeah, and I like that. So finding that's something we do in therapy, like what is necessary for your healing? Like, how can this forgiveness look for you? How can this grief look for you? What are some, I like how you use the word symbols, Martha, like it was symbolic for you to write a letter and burn it. That's really awesome. And it took a little while for you to figure out that would be the way to do it. Yeah. So let's see, advancing forgiveness.
Targeting the people, the individual that really you need to focus on, as far as examples of, because there are times when it is yourself. I mean,
exactly.
Yes.
You know, that you have to forgive.
Yeah, so these are where our forgiveness can go.
Yeah.
So we can start with where people who have caused you pain. So it could be loved ones. Oh my gosh, when we first started talking about forgiveness and I was trying to think of a personal story, the first, and this is, if you have siblings, it's probably maybe where your head has gone. Like the first thought was, oh my gosh, when my sisters and I, that's the first place we learn, if we have siblings, that we learn forgiveness. I don't know if your mom was ever like, okay, you have to stand here until you can say I forgive you. Say I'm sorry. But that the people who cause the most pain are sometimes the people you love the most, because you have the most exposure, the most vulnerability with them, the most time spent with them, lots of other reasons.
And it's also can be a loved one who did nothing to stop the act.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be the person that committed the act. It's a loved one who did not stop the act.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So committing, yeah. So even if, like in my example, if my sister did something like steal my toy or read my diary, how about we say that? She read my diary. Okay. That is a hurtful thing, right? And if my mom saw her sneak into my room and steal the diary and didn't do anything about it, yeah, she didn't technically steal my diary and read it, but she maybe didn't instruct my sister not to. That didn't happen before. My sisters respected my journals. Not that I know of. But yes, there would need to be some forgiveness towards the person, my mom maybe, who didn't stop it, or maybe my other sister who didn't stop it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yourself. This is a big one.
Oh, yeah.
If you caused an accident or the traumatic event or unrealistic guilt, like not doing too much or doing too much, oh my goodness. Martha, when you were on your educational, what's the word, sabbatical for for forgiveness in your life, did you have to forgive yourself at some point too when you were working on your forgiveness?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because I had unrealistic, I was a child or a teenager, and I had unrealistic ideas of what a parent should do in protecting a child, or therefore a child, and realizing, how young my parents were, and they didn't have the skills and maturity. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Totally. No, yes, you're totally making sense. And so that also touches on the loved one who didn't do anything, right?
Right.
And then, and having to forgive that, I as a social worker did so much education on the systems and the levels and the generations that we come from, and how our environment really impacts how we live our life and our decision making, and even how we deal with our feelings. And so a loved one who might not have committed an act but didn't do anything to stop something from happening, when you are able to think about their education, their background, what they were able to learn, that does give you some empathy or sympathy towards them. Yeah. And then that helps yourself be able to forgive not only them, but also you for maybe expecting them, maybe having bitterness towards them and expecting too much of them in some moments. Yeah.
Right.
And then others like professionals, friends and family, God. Oh, this is interesting. The medical authorities, someone who was doing their professional job and saving maybe someone's life, or treating someone you love, or maybe even treating you, and something happening the way it happened, and maybe there was a death, or maybe there was an injury that resulted from some procedure. And so, yeah, having to forgive on that level too. Do you guys have experience with that?
Well, certainly when there's been an error made. I think of a situation back in the 80s. I was in a large hospital in an administrative position, and one of the supervisors had a daughter who was going through birth, and there was some probably mismanagement of the process, and the child did have some injuries resulting from a rather traumatic birth. And the situations where, had that maybe been dealt with in a different manner, the child wouldn't be then burdened with some issues that they'll live with for the rest of their life. And so that kind of a situation I can see where there would be a lot of anger and directed towards the care providers.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And there are certain other things where maybe somebody overlooked an early warning symptom, or
right.
I think about even parents who think that a situation that their kids are experiencing may not be that difficult and something major, you know, so we have all those things where we just misread the cues, and it's because it was intentional. It was just something didn't connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how hard it would be to continue dealing with that bitterness when we can't change what happened. Yeah. Right? We can't change it, and that's not going to help us, especially if we are physically suffering from something like that, or physically we don't have the same house because we lost it in a divorce battle, or we don't get the kids all the time because we lost part of the time with them through custody agreements. And if we stay in our bitterness, that prevents us from really fully living and being present in our healing and in our just living, moving forward. So let's talk about that. How do we activate forgiveness? So now we're at the point of talking about, what does forgiveness look like? So when we are ready to give forgiveness, what does this look like? I love this breakdown, because this is not just the act of doing the forgiveness. This is like all the bits and pieces around it. So anticipate distractions. Oh my goodness, all the distractions, right? So we might be ready to forgive, but we haven't quite settled that yet in our hearts. So maybe the bitterness isn't quite as there. And so we aren't fumbling with our phones or throwing something across the room when it, I don't know, you know, how we live in our bitterness sometimes, and our actions are not always the kindest. But maybe we're ready, but then all of a sudden there's something else that comes up. There's another reason why, oh, it's just another tally to put along here. It's just another phone call they didn't pick up. Or maybe, I like the second one, maybe it takes a friend. Have you ever had the experience where you do that? Well, what advice would you give a friend dealing with this? And you realize that, well, I would just tell my friend to get it over with and just give the forgiveness and not be bitter anymore. And then recognizing that as the personal message you need to give yourself. So yes, we can easily get distracted. And so when we anticipate that, that's helpful, because then we know to look for that and to just get on with it. Acknowledge the facts. What are the circumstances surrounding the event? What specifically did they do to hurt you? That is really helpful. Sometimes we go through life dealing with, I did this before with a work situation where it wasn't like anything in particular was outright a wrong action that someone did where I would be like, oh yes, as a Christian, I need to forgive. It wasn't quite the sequence of events that you would imagine, but I recognized that I had bitterness in my heart finally. And it took someone else kind of bringing that up and me realizing, oh my gosh, while they haven't outright hurt me, there has been hurt through little things that have happened and have piled up. And so I really need to practice forgiveness here. And when I was specific, then I really had to be specific in order for me to feel better, to feel the bitterness go away. And when I was specific about it and I looked at all the facts, that's when I really recognized the need for forgiveness too. So that helps paint the picture a little more. allowing the pain to surface. Martha, when you were talking about the letter writing, that was part of your act in this letter writing, right? It's like allowing the pain to surface.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about your feelings, maybe recognizing your feelings, acknowledging you hurt me. That's an important part of forgiveness. I felt anger. I felt whatever it was. And then being able to say, but, and going on to the next one, I have made this decision to forgive. I'm giving away my pain, and I am putting it all at the feet of Jesus, or however you had worded your forgiveness. And also, because while your emotions are relevant, you didn't want those emotions to still have that power over you, like we were saying.
Yes.
And so that kind of helps with that act. Yeah. But so you still had in your letter this rise of emotions, and you didn't even tell me that. I just knew that you had done that in your letter, because that's why we kind of write a letter, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Explore that. Yeah. Then placing the debt owed by the offending person in the hands of God. He's the ultimate judge, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had, especially with this COVID pandemic that we're dealing with, I have a client who is really starting to struggle with anxiety. And when we started exploring, actually she wasn't a client until we started exploring how, all of this in her life that has been going on, it could really stem from anxiety. Maybe I do have a problem. Do you want to continue talking? She's like, yes, I do. So in our conversation with anxiety and anger and now forgiveness, shame was also an emotion we explored. It gets to a point where we have to remember we're not God.
Yeah.
Like, we have these emotions here, and Ray does such a good job of exploring how our emotions have a spiritual purpose, and they really do point us back to God, and us being able to say, okay, I give this away. Like, I'm ready to not be anxious anymore. And so I can do what I can do for myself, but now I'm giving it away. I'm placing it at God's feet. So with forgiveness, we do the same thing. Like, here's this pain that I had, and now I'm ready to offload it and not let it, what that looks like is not letting it surround me every day, not letting it have that spark of anger in me, because you emotionally have this change when you forgive, where you're able to think of that event maybe, or that hurt that happened, and the hurt is not as fresh. It's not as controlling of your emotions. You're able to regulate still, and in a good way, right? Does that sound right about forgiveness when you're not as angry?
Okay, it's hard to say in a good way, to be honest with you. It at least it is for me, but it doesn't have the impact. It doesn't drag you down. It does not infect your life. Mm-hmm. But times, depending on your recall of an event, just saying, okay, that's what happened, and now I choose, with God's help, to go forth to something else in my life.
And sometimes we have to remind ourselves over and over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the hurt is still there. Might not be as fresh, but we can then reframe. And that's what this image of laying it at God's feet, or the hands of God, is by saying it's an action then to not let it continue, that hurt as deep as it had before, because we know God doesn't want us to continue living in hurt. And we know bad things happen that he doesn't want to happen. And we know that he wants us to live a life without pain, and especially emotionally. And so he's there to take it away for us. Yeah. Oh, and then choosing a life, we haven't even talked about this, but without seeking vengeance, wrath, or restitution. Yeah, that's another big one, especially when we've been wronged, that we feel like we're owed something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's little things like, well, Mom, you need to, like, she shouldn't have dessert because she stole my diary. There's little things like that. But then when we think of like slavery and how restitution is still something that's being resolved in our country in some places, or being asked for, you know, there's, and that's a whole nother can of worms that I did not mean to open. but that's a different, I don't mean that they don't deserve restitution, but that is an example of a wrong that has been done, and how it is hard to move on. And sometimes forgiveness is really hard to do. And sometimes it's something, it's easy and it's small. And sometimes it is a generational, an institutional issue. And vengeance or wrath or restitution, it looks different each time, really.
Well, those things don't bring
So
about
adopting an attitude of forgiveness. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Brenda.
Thought I was off. I was just going to say those things, vengeance and wrath and restitution, don't help us with the pain. We still have that pain. We think they're going to help. You know, it's right. It's right to, you know, give an eye for an eye kind of thing. We're going to, but it doesn't heal.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know that though, I guess. Forgiveness heals, I believe.
Forgiveness heals, right? Yeah. It allows us to go forward with God.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal. Oh my gosh, and ending on this point, that God has done his part, now you must do your part. Well, the fact that God sent Jesus to pay the debt of every wrong thing that we have ever done, even before we have done them, that's ginormous. And it's so humbling, and it makes me immediately want to call my sister and forgive her for stealing my diary. That didn't happen. No, but yeah, God has done his part. He has done all he can do for us. This is one of those free will categories, right? Where now it's up to us, and where our growing and our healing and our relationship with him really begins, because it is on us to make that decision. If we had a God that decided that we would forgive or not forgive people, we wouldn't be living, right? And forgiveness is such a beautiful thing, because we know that this world is full of pain, and we know that God did not intend for us to have pain, but that's our reality. And whether it's pain of a broken relationship, or a relationship has ended due to death, or relationship ending due to divorce, or due to even a move. Even I was just talking to teachers about, I was talking to elementary school teachers, and two of the teachers that I was speaking with are kindergarten teachers. And so the grief that they are having to deal with, that they aren't going to see their kids, their students from this year again, that the school year is going to end virtually and they will not get their hugs. They said, you know, I've never really been a material person. The teachers always get gifts and stuff at the end of the year. And they said that all of them said that the kind words that they receive are the most impactful, and they are so grateful they get to continue having those conversations with their students, but it's just not the same. So we're all grieving a little. And with all of this pain that we have and all these circumstances that we don't like and that we have to deal with, forgiveness is such a beautiful gift that God has given us, that it has so much power to offer our path to healing.
And we all also do not need to do it alone, without, but without others. And that's why we have the resources that we have available. Whether it's through the church or through a close friend, we don't have to walk that journey entirely by ourselves. And it probably is better if we don't. If we can get to the point, like reviewing the facts, people want to tell their story at some point. And hearing it and having someone else respond to it sometimes gives us that opportunity to see it in a different light.
Definitely. And there's something about that posture of, you know, I'm not God. I have hurt. God doesn't want me to hurt. And so I can forgive, and I can move to a place where I'm more established for healing. And that is not easy to do on your own, like you're saying. That's so true. Right. And so walking through that with someone, yeah, that's important. Especially if you're ready to forgive and another family member who might have experienced the loss is not ready to forgive.
Good point.
Yeah. Any other closing thoughts for tonight before we pray? Would anyone like to pray? If not, I will pray. Okay, I'll pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this lesson where we are able to learn about what a great tool that you have created, this forgiveness that you modeled so well for us, that you desire for us to not live a life of bitterness, that despite the hurt, despite the pain that this world brings us, that we have a way to live life in abundance, live life in love. And we thank you for taking our anger, for taking our bitterness, for taking our anxiety and our shame and our loneliness, and for bringing us back into relationship with you, for being God for us, for being a comforter and love. Thank you for doing this even before we were born, for choosing to love over and over and demonstrating that love for us. We thank you for this class that we have been able to explore all these different facets of grief. And I just pray that this class is impactful for others and that we are able to walk through life with one another. We thank you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.